Hey, what's going on, my friends? Thank you guys so much for being here. My name is Danny, and what you see behind me is the current state of my garage. Right now, it's a total mess. It's dark, it's outdated. I'm just gonna jump into the before and after, but if you stick around, I'll show you how I did it. So about a year ago, I started to renovate this garage. It was just a total mess, even more than it is now. I took off all the popcorn ceilings, as you can see. I removed the drywall tape, and then I just kind of stopped. It wasn't very much fun, and I got to the point where I had to do one of my least favorite things, which was sand ceilings. And I moved on to other projects and kind of just forgot about it. But here I am a year later, making some videos, and I want a nice backdrop. So that's my motivation. Let's do it. With hopes to keep dust to a minimum, I tried using the drywall attachment on my shop vac. It works great on walls, but sadly with ceilings, the suction makes it difficult to get good leverage, and it was slow and required way more effort. I quickly switched to a pulse sander using a 120 grit sanding screen. If you want a really smooth finish, I'd recommend following it up with 220 or higher and filling any voids between sandings. Since it's just the garage, I can get away with some imperfections. The cleanup didn't take as long as I had actually expected. Between using a dust collection attachment and then later following it up with the leaf blower, it made for pretty quick work. Once I started doing all the touch-up, I found my garage needed way more help than I first realized. There were leftover voids in the ceilings, dozens of holes and scratches throughout, chipped paint, popped drywall nails, and almost all of the corners needed new drywall tape. I wanted to make sure I corrected as much as I could before I started on any finishings like the trim. And I found a couple spiders who were not paying rent. When I mentioned taking off popcorn ceilings last year, I also removed the trim during the same time. These windows were actually what kicked off the entire renovation, and it went something like this. If I wanted to replace the trim, I might as well paint the walls. If I was painting the walls, I might as well remove the popcorn ceilings. And if I'm doing all of that, I might as well just do a full renovation. I had some leftover MDF trim from a prior project, and based on my measurements, I had the exact amount needed as long as I didn't mess up. And I messed up twice. I ran to the store to pick up some more, but found that the style of trim was not in stock, so I pulled it off and started over. Instead, I opted for 2¼ inch pine trim. I prefer working with pine anyway, and I was really happy with how it turned out. I ran a bead of paintable latex caulking around all of the seams of the windows and doors. And with all that done, I was finally ready to start painting. I put off buying a paint sprayer for years, but finally decided to give it a go, and boy am I happy I did. I used this thing to prime the windows and door frames, the pegboard, the whole ceilings, and eventually the workbench. I used Kills 3 on everything, but for the ceilings I used Kills PVA because it was just cheaper and it's intended for bare drywall. Because my ceilings are low, I really wanted lights with a low profile. These fixtures are super light and made from plastic, which is great for when I'm working on a project and I will inevitably slam a board right into the ceiling. I had a friend come over and help me snap chalk lines across the ceiling where I wanted these mounted, and then roughly drilled holes for the mounting brackets along these lines. The instructions didn't include drywall anchors, but I wanted to use them to ensure a good hold. Once the metal fittings were attached, all I had to do was snap the lights and wire them up to the power. And as a side note, the ground light that I'm using is on a separate breaker. If you do decide to clean out your entire garage, I wouldn't recommend putting everything into one giant box. This workbench was in pretty rough shape, but I really wanted to get the most out of it that I could. What I wanted to do here was break it down to the basic structure so I could rebuild it from the ground up. After a quick wash with some water and some soap, it was ready for primer. These extra boards on the base help to seal all the gaps in the particle board, and I think it just makes the whole bench look a lot better. I don't think anything on this entire bench was square, but I think I can beat it till it's good enough to work with what I had planned. I used 2x2s to extend the frame out so it's flush for the future face frame. I used this template to make sure my shelves were tall enough for some storage bins, but also leave clearance for the face frame, which you'll see here in just a minute. This is extra 1/4 ounce trim I had, so I used it to cover some of the bigger gaps in the back. Now all it needs is one more coat of primer, and then we're on to the final coat of paint. For this final coat, I used Bare City Rain in an eggshell finish. You'll typically want to use a higher gloss paint for cabinets due to its durability, but I wanted a less shiny appearance, so I was willing to take that risk. You'll see my design allows for minimal contact with painted surfaces anyway, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Because seriously nothing was square, I had to make all custom angled cuts in order to get these shelves to fit.
So then I take the piece of wood and I clamp the wood, and then I saw it.
My wife may need to do my voiceovers from here out, but I used my circular saw with an edge guide for the straight cuts and then a jigsaw for my angled cuts. I built supports for the front and the back of the shelves and then used pine trim to cover up the face. Here I drilled 2 pocket holes on each end of all of the vertical boards for the face frame. After drilling my pocket holes, I was able to lay everything out on the ground and start assembling my face frame. Using a large face clamp where the boards meet ensures the joints remain flush to each other. I used a couple scrap pieces of wood to bring that face frame up off the ground, and I think it's really going to help to keep sawdust out of those corners. I cut some thin strips to make the bottom flush to hold up the 2x2 front trim. These 2x2s will act as runners to protect the trim face as well as the paint when removing the storage bins. Now all I have to do is nail it together, throw in my runners, and this thing will finally be done. These runners are my solution to keeping the paint intact. By using unpainted particle board for the top shelves and then these runners below, I should have very little wear on the paint itself. I really like these edging tools and I found that it speeds up the process quite a bit. Here I am using Bare Swiss Coffee in an eggshell finish. I chose a very light color to make the space feel bright and more open. This tool did take some practice and patience to get a consistent finish. It's really easy to load it up with too much paint and get drips everywhere. When I started rolling on paint, I realized I forgot to take the outlet cover off. It was already cracked, so I tried pulling it off, but that didn't work. I was being lazy and I didn't want to set my roller down, so I used the closest tool I had on hand. Painting technique can be pretty complicated, but in general just paint in one direction to the other in long, overlapping lines, making sure to feather your leading edge, and you'll be okay. We are in a pretty good spot. I have all of the big projects knocked out. I still don't know what I'm gonna do with this workbench. There's these two big empty spots. It's beyond the scope of this video. I wanna do maybe like shelves or drawers or something, but if you have any ideas, let me know. Other than that, we've got a couple other little touch-ups to do, and then this thing will be done. I was trying to think of a way to pad these beams while still maintaining a clean look, and I came up with a neat idea. I thought, what if I wrapped the whole thing in paracord? So I bought a couple of 50-foot sections and started wrapping. I hot glued the cord vertically so when wrapped, it would lock itself in and hopefully I won't have to worry about it unraveling in the future. After I installed the lights that I showed earlier, I went back and added an additional row. The connecting cords were way too long, so I looped the cord to get a general idea where to cut. Then I trimmed them at this location using the most ridiculous tool I could have used. Because I still couldn't find my wire cutters, I carefully cut the wires with a razor blade. I fumbled my way through some soldering and used shrink tubing to clean everything up. Alright, back to the beam. It turns out 100 feet wasn't near enough. This whole project used about 400 feet of cord. Electrical work may seem intimidating, but as long as you turn the power off and take time to learn, in my opinion, replacing outlets and switches can be a simple DIY that can have a really big impact. I think changing blinds and doorknobs were some of the first home DIY projects when I still lived with my parents. You gotta start somewhere. Here I swapped out some broken blinds and a 40-year-old doorknob, and with that, this garage had a brand new lease on life. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I also hope that you are interested in watching future videos. If so, please consider subscribing. If you don't want to, I get it. I'm not mad. I understand. Oh, oh my.